Off. Welcome everybody to the tasting this evening. Three fantastic VAT ones to jump into. A couple of introductions just before we kick off. I'm Luke Baldwin, one of the senior wine brokers here. We have, of course, Mark Faber, our wine buyer. Jane Moore is looking after the Facebook thread, the text-in competition, and basically keeping the wheels turning. Whilst he's not on the screen there, we also have Michael Morgan, who is our seller release manager, and will be doing a quick introduction to the marketplace in a second. So great to have all the experts on board. Now, of course, our guest speaker for the evening really doesn't need an introduction, but Bruce, I'm going to give you one anyway. Bruce is the fourth generation of one of the most famed names in the Australian wine industry. In 2006, Bruce was recognised with an Order of Australia medal for his contribution to the Australian wine industry. In 2009, he was named Hunter Valley Living Legend at the Hunter Valley Wine Awards. And under Bruce's stewardship, TYRRELL'S received Australian Winery of the Year by James Halliday in 2010. So suffice it to say, Bruce's insights into the Hunter Valley, into SEMILLON, and more specifically for this evening, into the VAT 1, are second to none. And we're delighted to have him speak this evening. So welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for everyone for joining in.
So one of the reasons we've put this tasting together is to demonstrate how great wine can age, which is a perfect segue to throw to Michael to introduce the United Cellars Marketplace.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming along this evening. I'm really excited to get into the wines this evening because it does, as Luke said, it sort of ties into what I do at this business quite well. What the marketplace is that the marketplace is all about buying and selling wines out of high quality sellers from private individuals. And as I said, it ties in really well because I think some of the best aging wines, not only in Australia, but on the planet, actually come out of, the Hunter Valley. So what we're doing with the marketplace is that we're doing all sorts of things from small batch valuations to handling a handful of deceased estate sellers. And the idea is that we understand that your tastes change over time, your palate evolves, and you might have wines that you've been aging for a long time with love and care that you're not necessarily quite as excited about to drink anymore, but you've got no more space. And that's where I come in. I'm here to try and give you the best possible price available and then to look and try and find a new loving home for those wines. And conversely, if you're looking for something that's got some great age because you want to see what perhaps some of the wines in your cellar might look like when they're 15 or 20 years old, that's where I can come in and help you out as well. It's all about personal service. Everything is personalized for your exact situation. And that's just what I'm here tonight. If you've got any questions, please feel free to stick around and speak to me afterwards. But everything that I do, as I said, it's all personalized to your situation. So feel free to ask me any questions whatsoever. But for now, I'm really excited to try some VAT 1, and I hope you guys are too.
Exactly. So just before we do so, a couple of bits of admin to mention for everybody. And I would encourage you to start pouring your wines. And as we've said, feel free to pour all three so you can compare and contrast. So for those who haven't come to one of our virtual tastings, we are doing another Wheel of Wine quiz. So between each wine, we're going to be launching a quick quiz question. All we want you to do is just text in with your name, your number, and your email to the number on the screen. An incorrect answer gets you 1 entry into the Wheel of Wine. A correct answer gets you 3, and we'll be spinning it at the end of the evening. So it's your chance to win the $50 credit, maybe to put towards a nice case of VAT 1. I don't know, it's your credit, but I definitely encourage it. Now I say this every week, but we want these to be as interactive as possible. We love your questions, your comments, and your tasting notes. Creativity is always encouraged. We've already asked everybody what they predicted would be their favorite VAT 1, so we'll be referencing that at the end of the evening. But feel free to unmute anytime or use the chat box. And we'd love to get those questions answered by Bruce. We were also lucky enough to go to the Hunter this last weekend, And we've put together a little virtual tour of the vineyards that I sent out to you this afternoon. So feel free to reference upon that whilst we're tasting these wines this evening. But that is enough for me. I know everybody's itching to get into the wine. So I'm going to hand over to Bruce and to Mark, and we're going to start exploring Semillon.
Fantastic. You want to start, Mark, or you want me to do it?
Mate, I might just say a few words if that's all right. Thanks, Bruce, if that's possible. Thank you very much. Now, from my personal perspective as the buyer here, so first of all, a big thank you to Bruce for hosting us last Saturday. It was very, very kind of you. Your team was fantastic. And as Luke just mentioned, we've managed to get an amazing little tour through the old winery, which is amazing. And very, very cool technology. You can actually go through, as we walk through, you can actually control where the camera goes. It's very, very, very cool. But what I just wanted to say myself from a personal perspective was just on Semillon as a grape overall. I thought I'd use a quote from one of my favorite wine writers, Jancis Robinson, here on the page. So Semillon really is, as she says here, it is the unsung hero. It really is one of the it's like a workhorse grape variety that very, very rarely gets the recognition it's due. And especially in Australia here, I've had the great opportunity of trying several Semillons from multiple different vintages, and it is a very, very impressive grape variety, as you're about to see. I had the great pleasure many years ago of hosting some international sommeliers from overseas, and I was asked by Wine Australia to put on a tasting for them, and they asked me to come up with 5 wines that were uniquely Australian. And the first wine that I served was, of course, TYRRELL'S VAT1 Semillon. It is just such a unique style of wine, not only in the Australian wine world, but in the global wine world. No one makes wine like this. So you are really tasting a unique piece of grape right here. So that's enough for me for my intro. We're not here to listen to me. We're here for you, Brucey. So I'm going to hand over to you, mate.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Yeah, great quote, that one. Jancis really is a very old friend, and she's been wonderful to us and wonderful to Hunter Semillon. Why is it so special? I don't know. This is one of, I think, 3 things we do in Australia you can't find anywhere else in the world. There's Hunter Semillon, there's Northeast Victorian fortifieds, and there's sparkling Burgundy, as I was brought on, sparkling Shiraz. Can't find those 3 wines anywhere else in the world, and they're quite specific. Why does it work in the Hunter and not as well in other places? You go to somewhere like Bordeaux, there's more, I think, more Semillon planted in Bordeaux than there are vineyards in Australia, or maybe that's a few years ago. But over there, it makes fairly coarse, ordinary, broad white. I remember used to share an agent in the UK that was a part owned by Lafite. And, not Lafite, sorry, Mouton Rothschild. And I was with Patrick Leon, who was the chief winemaker, and we'd been to look at something, and we drove back to the winery, and we'd been talking about Semillon the whole trip. And we got out of the car, and I went to walk into the winery, and he went, no, over here. Gave me a set of pruning shears in the vineyard and said, how do you prune your Semillon? And I showed him, and I think I got the French version of bugger. And he said, I've tried that, and we just can't get there. We can't make these wines, which was a wonderful compliment to get. But we're the most northerly of the premium wine regions. The next one to us is actually Clare, which is the same latitude as Sydney. And we're supposedly the hot regions, yet we both make fine, elegant whites that live for a long time and sort of dispel the cold climate necessity fairly rapidly. Being more northerly means we get vintage earlier. Our vintage is in the middle of summer rather than the end of summer. And so for Semillon, this is so important because we get our flavour at much lower alcohol levels. So we're picking Semillon at 10.5 to 11 really. That's about where I like to get it these days. which gives me just enough flavour that keeps the really low pH and keeps the really strong acid. Vat 1 just comes off across the road. There's a block off the side of the creek, and it's very light sandy country, and we're told by the soil scientists there's a band of calcite that runs through that that's unique to that little bit of country. So that gives us a bit of a chance. You can see where the bottle is, and if you look just above the bottle, you'll see there's a white strip at diagonal across the map. That comes off the creek here. That's the bit of soil where both Vat 1 and Vat 47 come from. They are two great whites, and the scientists tell us that that's a unique bit of dirt. What it seems to do compared to our other SEMILLON vineyards is that bit of dirt gives us more power or structure. The wines off that bit of dirt are stronger, more robust wines. But of course, with the great ability to live. Just there now above it, there's a bit of soil there. There's about 15 acres, belongs to our neighbours. And I've always said to my children, if it happens after I die and they want to sell out, we own some country just below the bottom of the screen. Tell them you'll give them 2 acres off the back of ours for 1 acre of that, because that's the same as this soil and will make sensational white wine. The age of the blocks through there of SEMILLON are from 1923 through to 1990, 1991. We had a lot of other odd varieties in there. And in 1990, before vintage, I was standing in the middle of the vineyard with my father and said, "You and I got to be bloody fools. We've got the greatest bit of white country probably in Australia, and we've got all these lousy varieties planted there." So immediately we finished picking. That got pruned with the D9 method. We put the bulldozer through it and replanted it all to Chardonnay and to SEMILLON. So it's a mixed bag. There's little blocks of both here and there throughout that, but that's what really makes Vat 1 and makes our SEMILLON different. Winemaking is very simple. Pick them when they're flavour ripe. The chemistry testing's fine, and you need to know what that is, but it's all about the flavour and the fruit. So we don't pick till we reckon the flavour's right. All of that's hand-picked. It's 3 minutes in the tractor to the winery. SEMILLON's crushed quick as we can through the crusher into the press. And these are basket presses. So we get a lot of draining, and we actually these days have a sieve in the bottom of the receival pit to the crusher. So any juice that comes out there is taken away at that stage. So we're getting the juice away from the skins as quickly as we can and getting that juice cold. Then they go into tank. They're racked a couple of days later after the coal settled, left to settle, racked off lees and put into bottles. It's as simple as that. No oak, no malolactic. My chief winemaker, Andrew Spinnersy, and I have this joke that if you get a young winemaker who comes into the winery and they want to fiddle with the SEMILLON, the best thing to do is immediately take them around the back of the winery and shoot them. Because if you just sack them, they'll go somewhere else and want to do it. It's a bit like getting a bad bull out of your cattle breeding herd. I did walk into the winery a few years ago with an automatic shotgun under my arm. There were people going in all directions. So into bottles, and for Vat 1 and the single vineyard wines, then they're put in the shed for another 4 to 5 years to get bottle age. And that's the great thing of this wine, is you can drink them very young and they're fresh and vibrant. You wait till about 5 years old and you start then to get some real fullness and richness of flavour on the palate. And then that changes again at about 10 years old. And then they go through that period where they really do fill out quite a lot. But these wines will live for 30, 40 years. You'll still see the bit of freshness and vibrancy and great acid on the finish. That's what makes these wines unique. This is this low alcohol, unwooded, uncomplicated wine that'll live for 30, 40 years. So it is truly one of the great and unique wines of Australia. Probably in the last 40 years, this would be white wine wise the single most awarded wine in Australia through all of that wine shows. And the wine we beat was actually Lindeman's Hunter River Riesling, which is of course SEMILLON, 1970. There's one in the northern of the mountain. So so there it is. It's very simple to make. What have we got? 15. 15 is cooler, wetter year. Reasonably warm, 14 growing season, pretty warm, good solid season, bit of rain at the right time when we needed it. And then as usual, Christmas, New Year storms, and they roll through a bit into January. So yeah, a lot of this was picked in fairly muddy conditions. But that was a stage where we'd started hand sorting in the vineyard. I don't have a sorting table at the winery because it's too late. We're not trying to get out leaves and unripe berries. We want to get anything that's a bit rotten and in second-hand condition. So we actually do the sorting in the bins. We can have up to 6 people standing around a little 1-ton bin, and the bucket boys can only tip 1 bucket at a time, and every bunch is picked up and gone over and cleaned and put back in. So that keeps that clean. In 15, we had to do a bit of that. I was always worried about this wine, actually, that it might not ever make the grade, that it might be a bit thin on the finish. And I used to avoid it. We'd have a tasting of everything we had in the long-term warehouse, and I'd avoid this wine. And then I had a look at it about 12 months ago and thought, you silly bug, you should have been tasting this before, because it had really come over that. It was very shy as a young wine, but now as you can see, it's filled out. It's got really good flavour and character.
Bruce, thank you for that. Sorry, Mark. I'm really interested to get everyone's opinions on this. Bruce, just to keep you in the loop, we asked for everyone's predictions before they tasted this. Now, I'm going to pick on you first, Danny. Your prediction was the 2011. How's this standing up to it? Has it changed your mind at all?
Thanks for picking on me first. Look, this is lovely, very drinkable. I suspect that 2011 is probably going to have a lot more depth and character with the age. And I got to say, I prefer an aged Semillon myself. But this 2015, I can already taste. I kind of suspect it's probably going to be really good, maybe in another few years. But very drinkable right now.
And this is my new puppy.
Oh, very cute.
Thanks, Alison.
They tend to drink early.
Yeah. So from me, I do definitely agree with you, Danny, and I get a real kind of mineral purity in this wine, which is really quite the beauty of Semillon is it's kind of especially Hunter Semillon is that real clarity, that brightness. That's I get a bit of a salinity, a seashell salinity in this wine. So yeah, very very glad it's come around, Bruce. It's looking beautiful.
Fred, I'm going to pick on you because I'm pretty sure I know you're going to tell me that it's too young for you at the moment. But how do you feel about the 2015 so far?
It's drinkable than I thought it would be.
Oh.
But hi, Bruce.
Hi.
Like the older ones, I thought the 08 was going to bring. I found the 04 in the cellar, but I thought I'd better open the 08 to write one. But I like them old, and I like Bruce's wines that 15, 20 years.
Wow. I don't think I can wait that long for these. But you're obviously a very patient man, Fred.
Yep.
Is anyone lucky enough to be having some seafood with this right now?
Yeah, we got some prawns going on here.
Oh,
Nice.
that's the dream.
Yeah, well played.
We had some 2009 with some fresh oysters last night, and it just was the most magic. It's actually one of the things with these, even if they're young, you know, people come along, you get a plate of oysters and some lemon. Forget the lemon. Just pour a little bit of the SEMILLON into the oyster shell and then eat it. It is sensational.
That's what I love about it. It's multi-purpose.
Yep.
Well, with that, should we move on to quiz question 1 so we can start looking a little bit older and start having a look at the 11? So the question is, which vintage was Halliday talking about in his review? So I'm going to read it to you, and then the answer is either 1:15 or the answer 2:11. So there is just enough flesh for a little pleasure with lemon sherbet, lime leaf and straw. Real pleasure will come with at least 5 years down the track. So you've obviously tasted number 15. You might have to just predict for number 11 or take a cheeky sip now and then give us your prediction as to whether that Halliday review is for the 15 or the 11. So we've got about a minute timing to get your text messages in. Remember, the text message number is down at the bottom left of the screen. Just put in your name, your email, and your answer, either 1 or 2, and that gets you an entry into the Wheel of Wine.
If I could make a little commentary here, just while everyone's doing their answers, what I love doing is showing these wines to I mean SEMILLON in general, but more specifically when I can, something like that one, to visitors from overseas, or whenever I go overseas, I try and bring a Hunter SEMILLON, because so often in overseas markets, Australian wine is seen as highly alcoholic and big, fruity, and rich. Those are kind of the summaries that people would call Australian wines. That's what they would hallmark Australian wines as. And these wines, especially one that I'm looking at right now, this 15, is the polar opposite of that. We're looking at 11.5% alcohol. We're looking at mineral flavors. You know, this is a very, very European wine, you would say. And tasting these blind is really, really hard to pick when you're up against Chablis or something. So it's good old Hunter Chablis.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, if you were to make and we probably shouldn't make comparisons with overseas, there's no reason to, but Chablis is the style that I think this becomes closest to, because it always keeps that flintiness and fineness about it.
Age is better, though.
Yes.
Well, Bruce, wouldn't you compare your VAT 47? Because Chablis is a Chardonnay.
Yeah, I know. But these to me, these age like Chablis.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah, they've got the fine, like the Chablis are finer, they're lower alcohols than, there's not the plushness of the white Burgundies. And you get that sort of really oyster shell fresh acid out of these that you get out of Chablis. Or you used to get out of Chablis, I think, as they get warmer now. Chablis is becoming white Burgundy and Burgundy's becoming the Riverland.
All right. I think that's 1 minute, so we are going to call it. And Luke, would you like to reveal the answer?
Yes. So I hope you took a sip of the 2011 to try, because that's what Halliday was talking about.
All right.
So well done. So that gets you 3 entries. If you didn't get that correct, you still get an entry. So good luck. So should we see what James was talking about with the 2011?
Yeah.
After you, Bruce, please give us the introduction.
Yeah, well, it covers it pretty well, actually. Really good, even growing season. When you get that bit of rain, you're not wet all the time, but you're getting rain when you need it all the time. So you've got the vines are growing evenly, they're ripening evenly. It got fairly hot early. I remember there was one day I knocked the pickers off at 9:45 in the morning, and it was at 39 degrees. It was stinking hot. And so it was a little bit difficult earlier. So very much the opposite of growing and picking conditions to the 15 in a hotter, drier period. So the wine's bigger, a bit richer on the, or a bit fuller on the palate's probably a better word, and maybe not quite as complex on the finish. That maybe 11 they got a bit riper a bit too quickly, not quite as much hang time. Hang time problems in those two vintages, but for totally different reasons. One for heat and one for the wet. So yeah, a bit bigger, a bit fuller, a bit stronger is probably the other word for it. Everything else the same, exactly the same bits of vineyard, exactly the same winemaking, all of that. And of course, with these, as they have been since 04, all under screw caps. So they're all good bottles. It's wonderful to take that horrible problem we used to. In fact, you couldn't really do a tasting like this. It was all under cork because everyone would have different wine. That'd be very difficult. In fact,
You're going to be comparing different. There's I don't get that at all. I don't get that minerality.
Yeah, mine smells like a dead rat in the kitchen. Yeah, thank God we're out of those damn things. But yeah, so totally different vintage, but not severe conditions coming into vintage. So they did actually get that initial ripening period as nice and even consistent weather, albeit a little hot.
Bruce, because it was hotter at the end, and therefore yours was fuller, does that mean that it probably has less aging potential than the year before? Or
not necessarily, Fred. Right at the end of life, yeah, probably a year or two. But no, the pH. It's one of the things we have these really low pHs, and that's probably because we're earlier. These wines are 3.1. And as long as they're down there, you're going to get the aging. That's probably the important thing. And again, because we're earlier and warmer, all our acids, the strong acids. So if we were to leave that out till end of March, it'd be 14 alcohol, but the pH would be 3.6, and it'd be all malic acid, and the tartaric would have gone, and therefore they wouldn't have lived as long. Now that's the great thing here, is that early ripening is what puts us where we are. And a year like 11, we had some rain early, and then it dried up. And the reds, a lot of the 11 reds are just fantastic now, medium bodied and great fruit and finesse about it.
So Bruce, just a quick question here from the chat. So someone's asking, is that bigger, fuller flavour due to age or vintage?
Bit of both.
Yeah.
Bit of both, but probably age. It's, say, 11's a year. You're not going to keep it for 40 years. You want to drink that probably before it's 20 years old. It'll just, the acid's not as strong, pH is not as good.
I do love that. I mean, we're talking about, this is a young wine, drink it within 20 years. How many Australian wines can you say that about? There's not many that would last 10.
No, that's, and it is funny, because we're always, the South Australians particularly, but the rest of the industry, why are you growing grapes there? It's too far north. It rains at vintage time. It's all of this stuff. But actually, then you try the wines and go, well, they're actually really good. So those conditions are not necessarily bad. It just means that if you're growing grapes and making wine up here, you've got to have a fairly strong constitution to get through it, and a longer term view of the world.
And know when to pick.
Know when to pick.
Know when it's ready to go. Because if you get it wrong,
get it wrong, you're in. But it is the single most important event in the life of any wine anywhere in the world is the day it was picked, because things like Pinot Noir, you can miss it in 2 or 3 hours. Normally here, SEMILLONs, we reckon we got a day and a half either side. The Shiraz probably a bit shorter than that. But no, it's a fairly tight timetable.
For us, the Shiraz, they've usually got about 2 weeks, don't they?
Yeah. I always try at vintage time to have the next 5 to 7 days mapped out in my head. So we'll be firm committed on the picking board to maybe 3 days out. That's in, because you have to. You've got to lock in the people. You've got to lock in the equipment. If you're harvesting at night and it's a grape grower, he's got to have time to get his harvester and his truck driver in, and the logistics of it. Because that's the other bit of vintage you've got to get right, so logistics. You don't want grapes sitting on the back of a truck for 24 hours. So yeah, but that's about it. But then I'm thinking of the next 3 or 4 days beyond that all the time.
Bruce, with climate change, you've been observing the earlier picking. How much earlier is that at the moment, and when will you be before Christmas?
Well, in 1981, we started picking on the 6th of January, and we should have started on the 3rd. So it comes and goes. The seasons come and go. But about 5 years ago, we took 2 old blocks of Chardonnay, 2 old blocks of SEMILLON, 2 old blocks of Shiraz, and we plotted the picking dates and the bud burst dates. So the difference is your ripening period, which is really important. And the fear, obviously, is that your ripening period gets smaller, gets shorter, and so you don't have the time to develop the flavours. So we then put a trend line through it, because you've got, if Easter's early this year, then vintage will be earlier. If Easter's late, vintage is late, because the climate doesn't run off the calendar on your desk. It runs off the lunar calendar. And so you've got to adjust a bit for that. But we put a trend line through them, and both, thank God, bud burst date and picking date have moved forward by about 2 weeks.
So not changing the level of complexity within the wine, the time it takes for it to actually
ripen.
Yeah. Just everything pushing kind of forward. Yeah.
Moving forward 2 weeks. Yes, there are great jokes about, well, actually in 1981 or New Year's Eve 1980, Arrowfield picked Tramina. So then I remember talking to Adrian Sherritt, the winemaker. I said, "What are you going to do about vintage on the label, mate?" He said, "I thought about that on New Year's Day, so I went back and checked the date on the picking dockets." He's just saved a whole lot of trouble.
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, that is definitely a good analogy for it. But they literally have 2 years. I think it was 2019, the start of 2019. The Australian wine industry has now said that there is a 2-week leniency period. So if anyone harvests grapes in the last 2 weeks of December, it is automatically pushed into the next year's vintage. So that we can't have 2 vintages in the same year.
South Africa have got the same sort of, they're in the same position.
Yep.
Bruce, we've just had a comment from Brad. He said that they're growing cattle out in the Hunter, and they found that the best vintages for wine have been the hardest years for them for the lack of water. So the last 4 years, really tough for them, whilst really good for wine.
Yeah, but we're in the same position. our crop levels for 17, 18 and 19 are not great. The yield per acre is down quite a bit, and there are some old vineyards around the area that have suffered. We got a couple of blocks of them here that were probably lucky to survive. So we're looking after them. When we pruned them back. We cut the amount of fruit on those vines back so that the vine had a chance to grow and build itself back up again. But after this season, they're all fine. They've grown like weeds, and as I might have said earlier, we've had double the amount of rain this year to last year, and you can put all the fertilizer on out of a bag or whatever, but the best fertilizer you get is what falls out of the sky with the rain.
Well, I'll point. I mean, this is a great picture of it here. I mean, you can just see this. This was obviously, this is just a Google Maps image, right? And this is obviously from last year.
Yeah, when you look at the grass along the side of the road,
I mean, that is the weeds are choking. I mean, it is an absolutely dry as anything. But when we show you, if you take a look at the video that we took on Saturday, you'll see just how beautiful and lush and green. And I mean, I stepped in a big mud puddle myself, so I can attest to the fact that there's definitely some water in the soil there, that's for sure. But this is a great picture of just, I mean, that is just so dry, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, no, the rabbits were coming out with a cut lunch and a bottle of water. Yeah, she was pretty dry. It was a real struggle. And when it's like that, you actually, it's very hard to get the fruit right, because you've got little berries that are over concentrated and not properly formed. So you can get you've got to be very careful. You get rid of those because you get a real bitterness through the wine from that. So yeah, restricted growth and drought conditions don't necessarily make better wine. We say if you walk into an orchard and there's an apple tree there with bright, shiny, plump apples, and the one next to it's got dull-looking, shriveled apples, I know which one will taste the best and which one you'll grab. You'll grab the big, shiny one.
It'll be very interesting to see what, because I mean, this 15, I mean, the 15 that we just tried was fantastic, but to see how, because we're going into that drought period now with the concurrent vintages. So it's going to be interesting to see how, see the evolution of that year on year. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating.
Fantastic. Should we move on to quiz question number 2 and then after the 08? Mark, if you just want to zoom us on one there.
I absolutely love this question coming up. Now, Bruce, you're not allowed to cheat. You're not allowed to tell anyone, right?
Well, I was going to say, it's kind of been mentioned a few times already. So the question is, what has Hunter Semillon not been known as? So answer number 1, Hunter Valley Viognier, Shepherd's Riesling, Rhine Gold, or Hunter River Chablis. So again, text to that number with your name, email, and answer, and just text us the answer number rather than the words themselves. So Mark, have you got this one? Could you?
I think I've got it. I think I definitely know a handful of ones that it is. A little bit of my kind of nerdy knowledge coming in as well. We could have added many other things if we'd expanded it out to the name of the Semillon grape around the world. Interestingly enough, in South Africa, back in this is going back 100 years now, but Semillon was so widely planted in South Africa, it was 90% of the vines in all of South Africa. It was absolutely everywhere, and everyone had Semillon everywhere. And it used to be called that what the South Africans called Semillon was, I'm not going to say it in Afrikaans, but it was white grape. They called it the white grape. It was the only grape they had. And that again, that shows the flexibility of that grape, because you could make it into a dry white, you could make it into a sweet wine as well, like they do in Sauterne, and de Bortoli's famous Noble One is a Semillon, Retrato Semillon. You could fortify it as well. It was such a flexible grape variety But just an interesting little little anecdote there.
Bruce, whilst everyone's getting their last texts in, we had another question from Brad, and again, it's so relevant. Does a reduced yield enhance and concentrate the flavour of the wine?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. You've got to have the conditions. You can concentrate what's in the berries, and we got some of this year in the drought. The end of the drought, we had these smaller concentrated berries, and there actually wasn't much flavour there because, again, the heat had pushed the vine on. They were getting ready earlier than they should, and so they're quite thin and quite hard and bitter. It's like you've pressed out, like drinking pressings before you start. So no, you want a nice, even, solid season. There's a lot of it, and I was talking about the apples before. Making the vine struggle and reducing the yield doesn't necessarily make for a better wine in the end, because you're making the vine want to survive, not produce flavour and the rest of the things that it produces.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Interesting. Does anyone know the Shepherd's Riesling story?
Yeah, no, you should enlighten us with all of these, Bruce, actually. I think it's much better coming from you than me.
You can tell us what it definitely has been called, and that'll bring us to the answer, won't it?
Yeah, well, Hunter Valley Viognier, obviously not.
Correct, yes.
Shepherd's Riesling is SEMILLON, or there was also known they were picking up vines in South Africa as green grape. But on one of the early second, third, or fourth, fifth fleet, there was a convict called Thomas Shepherd, who was a nurseryman. And each of the first fleet had grapevines on it. And a lot of which some came from Brazil and some came most of them from the Cape. And he thought that SEMILLON looked like true Riesling that he'd seen growing in Kew Gardens. And he was obviously a modest bloke, so he called it Shepherd's Riesling, because nobody knew. Nobody knew. I think the first fleet had 2 French convicts on it. And so therefore, if they were French, they must know about wine. And they were given the job of looking after those first cuttings, and they all bloody died. Rheingold could easily have had a bit of Hunter SEMILLON in it because of the Walkers originally, their ties in the Hunter. But Hunter River Chablis is probably the best description of it. So we used to have Hunter River Chablis, Hunter River Riesling, and Hunter River White Burgundy. And I remember asking Carl Stockhausen once, who was a long-term winemaker at Lindeman's, and he said the Chablis was what we picked early and probably had a bit of Trebbiano in it. The Riesling was in the middle of vintage and was probably just all SEMILLON. And the White Burgundy could have had a bit of Trebbiano in it, but was a bit riper because it was left out longer. So that was simply the 3 names. And it is really only in the last 30 odd years, that the term Hunter River Riesling or Hunter River Chablis disappeared. And I think we changed in the 1986 vintage. We changed. We did. Old man didn't want to do it, so we had half of the vat one was Hunter River Riesling, and the other half was SEMILLON. So it's only relatively new under the guise of SEMILLON.
Amazing. Okay, so we're going to move into the 2008. I should say this was when we asked for everybody's prediction. About 80% of people thought that the 2008 would be their favourite wine. So I'm really interested to get people's thoughts on it and whether it matches the 2015 and 11. Bruce, perhaps you could take us through the 2008.
2008, after 2007, great year. 2008, bloody wet. It's cold, cool to cold, and wet during vintage. There's a lot of hand sorting, quite big crop, and a year that, in fact, we made no red wine that year. I remember driving around all my grape growers with Mark Richardson, a red winemaker, and saying, and we over the day we developed this phrase that your red grapes have gone to God, and it seemed to make it easier for people to accept it. But also saying at the end, it's been a horrible day. You go and tell someone, well, half your income from the year just disappeared. And the good growers already knew it. They knew they weren't going to get picked. So we're driving up the hill and Mark said, this has been a terrible day. And I said, no, it hasn't. What you haven't done is fill the winery up with thin, slightly rotten red that's going to just give you troubles for the next 10 years till you get your winery clean again. So this will teach you that you've done the right thing. This wine has really filled out over time. And again, that lighter year, good acids in them and not terribly high. I think that's only about 10 alcohol, that one, isn't it? The 2008?
10.5.
10.5. Yeah, and it's still got quite a degree of sharp, fresh acid. And I think probably got a lot of time left to go.
An amazing, I get a really interesting, almost like a green leafy character in this wine, it's like a green gauge snow pea, I want to say.
Yep.
The leaves of a snow pea or something. Yeah, it's very interesting.
That comes from in a cool, overcast year. It's very difficult to get the grapes physiologically right. So you don't get the complete development of flavour because you're gambling between, I'd like to leave this out for another 5 to 6 days, but if I do, I'm going to lose 3/4 of my crop because it'll go rotten. So they're the decisions. Everyone, the guy's saying it's always very difficult making decisions in a really wet year of what to pick. And no, it's not. It's really easy. You've got 6 blocks that you want to pick, but you can only get a tractor into one of them, so you go and pick that one.
It's early and often.
A very simple, practical decision. Yeah. You don't want to have to carry them out to the end of the road. That's not fun. Those days, every time you fill the pickers' water bottles, you just put a bit more brandy in every time you go. It's a warm.
Make the day a bit easier. I really do. I am getting some of that absolutely gorgeous. What I love in aged Semillon is that honeyed character. I'm getting now that it's kind of breathing a little bit, and it's I had it a little bit too cold. It's actually starting to warm up a bit. I'm getting a real distinctive lime marmalade note on it, lime marmalade on toast. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Actually, aged Hunter Semillon, the one thing that probably the term I use a lot is that hot buttered toast when they get some age. That's what smell reminds me always of that.
Bruce, not Bruce Tyrrell, Bruce Hatley, if you are there, I can see Helena Hatley. Bruce, you sent a fantastic review of this wine, scoring it 96 points in your prediction. I wonder if you're able to unmute. Has it lived up to that score for you? What are your thoughts?
Well, look, it has lived up. Have I got it there?
Yes.
Yep, got it there. Yep. So it has lived up. I normally score out of 10, but I've made an exception after you wanted it out of 100. But so I've given it 8 3/4. I give the 11 8.5, and I give the 15 and 8. And not being that familiar with the years of the Hunter, I know living in Brisbane, 2011 was a very, very wet year because that was the year of our floods. So I thought it might have had a little bit more rain down there than what it did. But so that was the reasoning behind my choice before. But look, it's starting to develop that honey flavours and so forth. But personally, I'd like to leave it another 5 years and see what it's like then, and have it as a really, really mature Semillon, because that's you taste those really nice ones that have developed all those nice flavours that they can do, and they're the ones that I really like.
Have you been sponsored by Rhône this evening? You seem to have a very good product placement every shot that we see on that that screen there, Bruce.
well, look, if I just hold the move this around a little bit so you can perhaps see the table, the three of us here at the table. So we've all got
Very relaxed.
We've all got three Riedel glasses each, and that doesn't empty the cupboard where the good glasses are kept. So look, it's developed over the years, and thanks to our daughter in Singleton, who picked up a couple of those U-Boot specials from that Costco store, and had some Riedel glasses by, get a box of a dozen for $100 or something like that, and why not?
And I should say, Bruce, you last time we saw you on a virtual tasting, you were in New South Wales, were you? And your other?
I was.
No, Kathy was in New South Wales. So when Anastasia opened the border to the greater New South Wales, but not Sydney, so Kathy came home Thursday last week.
Ah,
Yeah.
fantastic.
So
Well,
she's been down there for, I think, 7 weeks with Sarah.
With a new baby.
So Sarah's got the new bub in Singleton, and so she's back home. So we're all at it.
Well, we should give you a cheers and a great excuse to enjoy some fantastic VAT one, I'd say.
A good one to be back for.
So the seafood will come after we finish this. We'll whack the barramundi on the barbie, and we'll have a bit of barra with the leftovers.
Very nice.
Wonderful.
Can I ask Bruce a couple of questions, please?
Go for it. Of course.
Bruce, I wondered where you got your 2002 futures from, which block? I found a box down, or 2 boxes down in the cellar.
I would suspect, in fact, I don't suspect, that would have come off HVD, right?
Well, you HVD next to that one, don't you?
Yeah, look, it sits there, one of those single vineyards. That bit, and it would have been the futures, would have come off that. The big block planted in 1908. There's what, 10.5 acres in it. So it's normally about 35 tonnes for 5,000 gallons, 2,500 dozen. It's a good chunk of beautiful old vines. They really are just wonderful.
And how would you describe the 2000 season? Just when we have the housewarming, the extension warming next door with a bunch of Clayton nuclears, I can appear knowledgeable.
No, look, there's probably drink. Just check them before you serve them.
Right.
It was a time of pretty ordinary quality cork.
All right.
Yeah, we had a bit of trouble with corks in 02. It was probably the one that drove us to change in 04.
They bought the cheapest.
Along with Penfolds, I think. They're all crumbles.
Whole lot of us did.
Put the mute button back. Oh, I'm fine.
Is it down 15? Who's on?
So if I can make a comment on the cork, there was over in France last year, and we're talking about that, and they talked about our wines being under screw cap and being cheap wines. I said, no, they're very expensive wines. The only reason we got rid of the cork was because you kept sending us the rubbish.
No, that was when we were in Portugal.
Okay,
we were talking about cork, and we were looking at cork trees, and yes, we made the comment about not having good cork here. And personally, we had thrown out some wine because they were corked.
Yeah. Remember in 1998, Charles Chevalier, who was chief winemaker at Lafite, Chateau Lafite, said to me, "Have you gone to screw cap yet?" I said, "No, look, we're looking at them. We started using them back in the mid-70s, and we're having a bit of cork problem. It's sort of time." And he said, "Change today. Never use another cork." Said, "Those bloody Portuguese lying, thieving bastards." And he said, 6 to 8 weeks before we bottle the first growths, he takes his 2 leading cellar hands. They were drive from Bordeaux to Portugal. They hand selected every cork individually. And he said there'd always be 3 of us. So every 8 hours, 2 of us were awake and 1 was asleep. Because the minute we take our eyes off those corks, said they'll substitute for rubbish. And he said, you're on the other side of the world. Go to Screw Cap tomorrow.
Mm.
And I wish I'd followed his advice and gone 2 or 3 years early.
Does that mean that the Portuguese wines have got better?
Well, should have.
You would think so.
Yeah, in general, quality control is not good. I've had the same quality control manager for 30 odd years. And we always say he's the most careful one in the wine industry because we got him out of the explosives industry.
He would be attention to detail, wouldn't he?
Oh, yeah, well, he said particularly if you're working up in the mountains in New Guinea, and the natives would steal it to use as fertiliser. Because if you want to make homemade explosive, you just need diesel fuel and nitrogen fertiliser and a detonator. And you can take the side out of a shed, no trouble. And so, that was it. We just really had to make the move. In fact, VAT 1 2003, it's a big chunk of it under Screw Cap, and it was actually bottled the day after VAT 1 2004. And we kept it in tank because we couldn't find corks that we were prepared to use. So yeah, that's in the past now. It's just Screw Cap just makes so much difference. And you need to get, when I really saw it, we had 1983, we bottled 10 dozen VAT 1 under Screw Cap. And we put it in the shed with 10 dozen under cork side by side. And we opened 6 dozen of each on the 10th anniversary of them being bottled, so 1993. And all the ones under Screw Cap had bottle age. They were sensational ones. There were 18 bottles under cork that were as good. And then after that, they just faded away to 6 or 7 that were undrinkable under cork. So there was just no question. If you try one bottle, you don't see it. You've got to have a reasonable number lined up to do it. So it looks like 11's the favourite.
Yeah, well, I've limited it, Bruce, to only 1 text per person because a few weeks ago, a certain Mr. Danny decided to spam.
No, you are.
He decided to rob me of my victory.
It looks like maybe I haven't had it to 1 per person, and the 11 has been rigged. We might need a vote count.
Bruce, could I ask you about marketing of SEMILLON? Because those of us who know it and have been exposed to it love it, yours and Andrew's and things, but there are many who say that it's really hard to SEMILLON.
Yeah, look, it's been, I suppose back in the 80s, when I think Andrew Spinizzi, chief winemaker, and I sort of realised that we had this wine that was totally unique and we were going to be lucky, one of those lucky people who get to do things that are unique, which is pretty rare, that we had to really work on it. Part of that, Fred, was to be able to get some of it into the market with bottle age. And that was the start of it. And then the other part was that we had to get the accolades. So we had to win the wine shows. We had to consistently get gold medals. And we were able to do that and maintain the quality. Spin and I have got very, very strict quality rules. And actually, when he became chief winemaker only 40 years ago this year, 1990, took over 1980, I'm sorry. So he's been 40 years. He's 62 years old, and he's been with us 40 odd years. That we promised ourselves we'd never push a wine up. Sorry, we don't ever push them down. So we've been absolutely rigid on the quality. And been prepared to put them away. And we believe we need to give those top wines 5-6 years bottle age to show what they really could do. And look, Hunter SEMILLON will never be a massive brand in the marketplace because there simply isn't enough of it. and there simply isn't enough of the really good dirt to grow it on. So it's specialty is not the right word. It's going to be one of those classic wines that you know, there's going to be what there is. In the last 10 years, we've gone from, yeah, there's always a bit left over at the end of the vintage release, now to having these wines pretty much on allocation. But I can't go and make more of that one because that's all I've got of that dirt. So until the neighbours move out or die, and I can get my hands on the next one, I promise not to shoot anybody, there's not going to be any more of it. So that's really, it is what it is. It's, I think you can't, that was the great moment of understanding, the moment the light went on when we sort of realised this is what it is, this is all there is of it, and now let's go and make the best of it we possibly can.
Great.
So yeah, look, international recognition is probably now what has really makes us stick our chest out a bit. But you know, internationally, it's considered as one of the great wines, one of the great wines of the world. It's a nice place to be. But geez, it's been a long, hard road.
Amazing. So, as you can see on the screen there, we have the Wheel of Wine. So, well done to everybody who got 6 possible points in there. It's pretty well populated there, so I think people did quite well. So, if everybody's ready, I'm going to give it a spin. Good luck to everybody, and well done to the winner.
Not spinning.
It's Bruce.
Well,
congratulations, Bruce. Well done.
Congrats, Bruce.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Can we get
Bruce,
a cheers?
Cheers, Bruce.
Sorry. Were the vines affected by the bushfire smoke taint or just?
Yeah, look, out of 2020, we basically, we picked less than 15% of our crop and made wine out of it because of smoke taint. I took the view early, very early. In fact, personally, I wrote the vintage off on about the 5th or 6th of January. I've seen smoke taint before. The 1969 vintage was rotten with it. And the wines, when they were young, it was sensational. They looked really good, big and bold. But inside 2 years, there was this change. And those of you who are old enough to remember the huge Saturday night dinner party, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, everyone went home and you were too drunk or too tired to clean up. And you came down the next morning into the dining room and there were 1 or 2 overflowing ashtrays. It's the same smell as if you walked through the Bangkok airport smoking room. That suddenly appeared in the wine. And you can't, look, we can test it. We know a whole lot more. We went into this year with no bloody idea. There's a huge amount of research been done and the area, and we all know a lot more about it. And it's more about the impact of fresh smoke rather than smoke hanging around. We have a vineyard behind us, the next ridge west of us, we call the Black Ridge, and it's got quite a big flat ridge on top, and then on the western side it drops away into a reasonably steep gully. And I said, all right, guys, I want a test off the top of the hill and I want a test down in the gully, thinking I'll be able to pick the top of the hill because the smoke will have blown away, but the gully bit will be no good. It was quite the other way around. And it was the fresh smoke blowing across the top. And so, yeah, 80 or 85% of our crop, most of it, because we were still in drought, hydraulic picking bin, and we just backed it up to the fence and tipped the grapes over the fence, and the cattle came from miles around.
Yes.
Because it was the first time they'd had anything, fresh to eat.
Oh, I did the same.
Oh, looks like we've got someone who's unmuted.
Yeah. So yeah, that's there really is. We made some. We buy some grapes from out at Wyndham, out on the river, the Belford vineyard, where we were testing, and they were under the limits that we, they were in an area where we knew they'd be okay. We've also learnt how to handle that fruit better. We had stuff that was testing, and I don't forget what the unit of measure is, but 50 is acceptable. So we had stuff at 75 that we were able to treat in the winery and get that down to 30, 35. A lot of that was just using the lees after fermentation and pumping it through, and then racking and pumping it through. So they're never going to be great wines, but they took them from undrinkable to nice drinking. So yeah, I wouldn't be buying a lot of 2020 from probably anywhere much and putting it away. So yeah, it's maybe a vintage time didn't exist really. Yeah, it was very strange, very strange.
Bruce, I'm conscious that we've run over the hour there, as much as it's so enjoyable to hear your thoughts. I'm just going to wrap up, if that's okay with everybody, because I know we've also got the breakout red to try as well. Just to cover off the upcoming events, of course, next week we have the Jewels of Rhône with Ali. A little bit of news on our side. We've also got Philippe Gugal and Max Chapoutier joining us on that one. So that will be a bit of a star-studded lineup. So if you feel like treating yourself, we'd love to have you on board there. We can still get that pack out to everybody in New South Wales. After that, we've got the Exploring Bubbles debate. We've got the Tuesday tutorial. So if you want to join us face-to-face on Tuesday, we've got the World of Sparkling on the 1st of December. And then finally, our last online event of the year, Alistair will be taking us through a bit of an adventure around South America, looking at some Chilean and Argentine wines. So really, really excited to get into all of those. Now,
just a quick note, if I can, we are quite limited with the Tuesday tutorial due to COVID restrictions and the 4 square meter rules. So if you are interested, please do get it. We sold a few more tickets today, so that one is selling fast. So please do let us know if you want to come along.
Fantastic. So I should say from all of us a big thank you to Bruce for his time. I will, for everybody who's picked up a bottle of the 09 Old Patch Shiraz, I'll be opening up the breakout room shortly. For those who don't have that wine, if you'd be interested in sticking around, we'd love to finish off of that one with you and have a drink and a conversation. But I think from all of us, thanks so much for coming. Really enjoyed your company.